That worked great. association dedicated to providing experiential learning opportunities to students in political science, civic engagement, and public affairs. I'd like to thank the Political Affairs Society Presidency and our co-host, the Political Science Department, for their work in planning this event. I'd also like to recognize Academic Vice President Justin Collings and President C. Shane Reese and Congresswoman Celeste Malloy, who are in attendance. And finally, I'd also like to thank Associate Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, Jeff Noakes. Because we value political and civic engagement, we want to ensure decorum at this event. We ask that all attendees conduct themselves with civility, which means refraining from the display of signs, shouting, or aggravating others in the audience during the course of the event. If these rules of conduct are violated, you will be kindly asked to leave and be escorted from the building. Additionally, we ask that attendees refrain from recording or taking photos. Finally, as this event concludes at 11:50 a.m., we ask that you limit our early departures. We will begin this event with an opening prayer given by Joe Peterson, Vice President of the Political Affairs Society. After this, Dr. Liz McGuire, Assistant Professor of the Political Science Department and a Faculty Advisor of the Political Affairs Society, will introduce our guest.
Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity to be at this university, and we're grateful for our country and for our freedoms. We pray that the troops abroad may be protected, and we're grateful for the founders and those ideals, and help us to always strive to live up to those ideals. And we pray that we can have thy Spirit to be with us, and that we can learn and gain wisdom from this event. And we pray that everyone may travel safely, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Senator John R. Curtis proudly represents Utah in the United States Senate. A former mayor and congressman, he's known for advancing consensus-driven policies and promoting common-sense conservative leadership. Recognized for his work on energy, fiscal responsibility, national security, and supporting local communities, he is guided by Utah's pioneer values of hard work, integrity, and innovation. Senator Curtis and his wife, Sue, have been married for 42 years and have 6 children and 17 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Senator Curtis.
I am so delighted to be with you today, and I think I can walk away from this, and it sounds like that'll still work. President, thank you. What an honor to be here. Thank you for the great hospitality, the great care for my visit. For those who don't know, there was quite a bit of care that went into me arriving here today. Can we just all enjoy the moment that in 1985, when I was a student, nobody cared when I came on campus, when I left. And today, there's just been an extraordinary amount of care, and thank you, President. It's really an honor to be with you. I don't mind telling you, I'm incredibly torn as I stand before you. I have some really good prepared remarks, and I have a million thoughts in my head, and I'm going to try to do a little bit of both. So would you be patient with me while I share some things that I want to share with you, and we may or may not refer to the incredibly well-prepared remarks that I have. First off, I can't help but think of the comparisons from when I was here as a student. I arrived here in I think my first semester was 1981, and graduated in 1985. And if you are a student of history, where's my history student right there? There's some incredible parallels between the time I was at BYU and your time right here. We had just followed Jimmy Carter as president. Inflation was so incredibly high that as my wife and I shopped for homes, we found a home that had an interest rate that we could assume. You would assume their loans because you didn't take out new loans because they were higher. Yeah, you're nodding because you were in that era, weren't you? We could assume the loan for 12% to buy a home. And we came home and said, that's a good deal. I had a CD at a bank that paid me 15% interest. They were paying me 15% interest because they were taking that money and loaning it at actually a higher percent interest. It was a very difficult time. Students at BYU couldn't find a job in Utah. That's a little different than right now. And many of us had to go outside the state to look for a job. The overseas was unrest, and people were very unhappy with their government. Sound familiar? And yet, we somehow made it. And at that time, just a fun little few facts, I served a mission in Taiwan, came back and was looking for a job, and the building has since been torn down. It's on University Avenue, where I swept parking lots to make a few bucks so that I could buy something at the Cougar Eat. And that job morphed into a job at the MTC, where I taught Chinese for a short time. My mission was to Taiwan. And I think what is really important for me to kind of communicate to you and to share with you is if you had told me at that time that I would eventually serve as the mayor of Provo, I would say that is never going to happen. I won't even live in Provo. And if you had told me that I would go on to serve in the United States House of Representatives for 7 years, I would not have seen that. And particularly if you'd told me that I would serve in the U.S. Senate, I would say, what, are you absolutely crazy? And yet here I am. And I've served as Provo's mayor in the House of Representatives and now as a U.S. Senator. And by the way, if you're curious, the best gig is mayor. It's a really fun thing. I kind of lament that most of you won't appreciate what I consider to be among my greatest accomplishments, and that was dealing with towing. Is that still a problem? Are you still being towed? Yeah, it was terrible. We put in some ordinances to try to fix that. So just a couple of thoughts about how I went from a BYU student to where I am today, and try to share with you any advice or any things that I found along the way. The first is there are a couple of key principles that if you don't remember anything else I share with you today, please remember these principles. The first principle is one of allies and alliances. Now think about that for a minute. Allies and alliances. Let me give you a good story to talk about allies and alliances. Does anybody know who Martha Hughes Cannon is? Oh, you do. A lot of you do. Okay, so she was the first woman state senator in the United States. She won that office, many of you know, by defeating her husband. What you don't know is that husband was my wife's great-grandfather. So if you know my wife, you know I look over my shoulder all the time, because if my wife runs against me, I'm out of here. I wouldn't even try, right? You know my wife, and she would definitely win. And so Martha Hughes Cannon had the difficult task of being a woman at a time when women couldn't vote. She was less than 5 feet tall. She convinced an all-male delegation at the state convention to put the right for women to vote into the state constitution. So how did she do that? Less than 5 feet tall, a woman who couldn't even vote had to convince men to put in the state constitution the right for women to vote. And to give you a little context for the era, Utah had been rejected for statehood 3 times. The men were afraid if they put the right for women to vote in there, they would be rejected again, and that was a big deal to them. So if you go back through history, what you find about the way that Martha Hughes Cannon worked is she didn't bludgeon the men. She didn't write an op-ed saying how bad men were. She didn't try to embarrass the men. She made them allies and alliances. She made them on her team. And so they were willing to be part of what she did. And if you think about that today and the way we function in our society, and you all see Washington, D.C., how many of you see us working as allies and alliances? Good. Oh, there's Celeste Malloy. Celeste, will you stand up? She's a big deal. Yes, you can clap. Do you know who she is? So Celeste serves in Congress in Washington, D.C. She has the part of the state that's the western part of the state, and is a year and a half now into this, Celeste. I'm so glad you could join us. Yeah. She's here to heckle me. Security, would you watch that one right there? It's really good to see you, Celeste. And Celeste knows a little bit about allies and alliances. Let me share a story that I think might be interesting for you on allies and alliances in Washington, D.C. There's a woman from Congress. Her name is Pramila Jayapal. She is the president of the Progressive Caucus. That means if there is a conservative is right here, Pramila is over on the outside of the door on the other side of campus, right? I mean, the difference in our politics is dramatic. But interestingly, I don't think you could find a single thing that we would agree on politically, right? That's what you would think. But I had a chance to travel with Representative Jayapal, and we traveled down and we went and looked at Venezuela and the Colombia border, and we watched people trying to come out of Venezuela because they can't eat. And we watched the oppression down on the Mexico border, and we spent a little bit of time together. We came back to Washington, and as we were departing, we said, hey, let's find something to work on together. And we both kind of smiled and chuckled and said, yeah, that's going to happen. And she reached out to me a little while ago, and she said, you know, that Utah passed a law that said if you are worried about yourself and you have tendencies that you might take your life, you can voluntarily take your name off of the right to be able to buy a gun. You know, that mirrors a state law that we have here in Utah. And she and I actually co-sponsored that bill together, and we found an area where we actually could work together and our values actually aligned, which then introduces the second principle, and that is the bad word for it is compromise. So what does compromise mean, right? And a lot of Washington tends to function on the level of compromise. So if you're going to compromise, that means that we find something that we want to do, and I give up half of what I want, and you give up half of what you want, and then we both plug our nose and vote for the bill. Do you think that's a good bill? Is that a good way to run the country? Well, what's a better way? And that is getting off of this base level of compromise and moving up to another level called common ground. And when you sit down and you find where you have common ground with somebody, there may be very little. With Pramila Jayapal and I, there just wasn't a whole lot. We saw taxes different. We saw immigration different. We saw business different. We saw almost everything different. But guess what? Who couldn't find a cross-section with suicides, right, and preventing suicides? And we found some common ground where we could actually work together. So the second principle, besides allies and alliances, is that of common ground, and in not compromise, but finding common ground. And what can you do with your roommate, your mission companion, right, and find common ground? Do any of you have a roommate you think I could never get along with? I actually had a mission companion, and I hate to admit it, but we would kneel down for companionship prayers, and everything about him irritated me, even the way he prayed. And but I'm here to tell you that if you get away from compromise and you work towards common ground, you'll be able to do some marvelous things. And there's not a single person on this campus that you don't have some cross-section of common ground with. And the third thing is kind of a fun story. So my great-grandfather lived in Scotland. So we can't bring up Scotland without bringing up Ireland. Thank you for wearing green today. Do you see I just embraced it? We went big. We went big into green, and some of you did as well. But my great-grandfather lived in Scotland, and more importantly, his mother and father lived in Scotland. His father worked in the coal mines, and the culture at the time was very, very difficult. Children were sent into the coal mines at an early age, And my great-great-grandfather had developed the habit of drinking. He would go work in the coal mines all day, a brutal day, and he'd stop at the pub on the way home and spend almost all the money he'd earned at the coal mines on the way home, and come home intoxicated. And of course, there was an abusive relationship once he came home. So my great-great-grandmother was very uncomfortable. Guess what? She found the missionaries, and they taught her, and she joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And her husband was very upset with that and said to her, "Woman, you either give up that religion or get out of the house." Well, guess what she chose? That was an easy decision for her. And so she boarded a ship and took her 3 children with her. One of those children was my great-grandfather. Boarded the ship to come over to the United States. Her last name was Robertson, and a family by the name of Curtis helped pay for her passage over. The husband changed his mind and came aboard the ship, grabbed the oldest son, and looked my great-great-grandmother in the eye and said, "Woman, if you leave, you will never see this son again." And so she had to make that choice. Imagine making that choice between possibly never seeing your son again, and if she chose to go back to that life, know that her children would be destined to a life of working in the coal mines and have a very difficult life, or leave that son and come over to the United States. And she made that very difficult choice to leave that son and come over to the United States. And he died in the Boer War. It was true, she never did see him again. Came over, family by the name of Curtis, who paid for the passage, took him in, and thus I am John Curtis instead of John Robertson because of that incident. But the story, as it continues, is my great-grandfather, who was that young boy on the ship, married. He had 8 sons and 2 daughters, lived up in Salt Lake City. Interestingly, 8 of those sons served as mission presidents for the church. 2 of the daughters' husbands served as mission presidents for that church. 2 of them served as temple presidents, and a couple of them as general authorities. That was the posterity that came down from that. But this long story is where I'm actually going for this. One night for family home evening, my great-grandfather and his wife took a bundle of sticks, and my great-grandmother handed one of the sticks to the oldest son and said, "See if you can break that." And of course, he quickly broke that stick in 2. And then she took the other sticks and she put some twine around them, and she handed that to the strongest son and said, "Now break those sticks." And you know where this is going. He couldn't break the sticks. And the motto was, "In unity there is strength." And he actually commissioned an artist who drew that bundle of sticks. And if you come see me in my Washington, D.C. office, you'll see that bundle of sticks bound together by that twine. Because when we're one, we're easily broken, but when we band together, we can't be broken. So now let me talk just a little bit about the affairs of the day and where we're at, and how these 3 principles apply to where we're at as a country. By the way, when you come see me in Washington, D.C., I want you to walk around the Capitol, those of you who have possibly done it. Does anybody know what the motto for the Capitol is? "Out of many there is one." And if you walk around the Capitol, you'll see sticks bound together everywhere, from the handrails to the paintings in the frame to the ceiling. Everywhere you look, you see these sticks bound together with twine. I don't think my grandfather knew. My great-grandfather knew that was part of the case. So now we're here at an era where, is it fair to say we're at a little bit of an unrest in our country? A lot of people are questioning, and by the way, this is exactly like 1985, 1982, when I came here. People were questioning what was happening, what was the president doing. With President Reagan inherited these interest rates. So he took the rate of interest rate that we had to pay and took it up in order to force the economy to actually do poorly, to bring interest rates down. It was very controversial at the time. Sound familiar? And yet, we are the greatest country in the world. And yet, every day, there are people around the world, and you know what they say? "I wish I was in the United States of America." And I've had a chance to travel to a lot of places around the world, and I will tell you this: on our worst day, everybody wants to be us. And while it feels like we're in a period of turmoil, the history students will tell you we've been here before. So does it feel like it's never been worse, right? Like it's just like our heads are about to explode? Well, what about the Civil War? What about Watergate? What about the riots of the 60s? And this is a wonderful thing about the country that you live in. We are what I call a self-healing country. And that is that every period that's been difficult for us, we come out of a better country than when we went into it. That happened in 1985 when I was here. It happened after the Civil War. It happened after the riots in the 60s. It happened after Watergate. And this is what you can't give up hope on, is that this is an amazing country. And our Constitution, in my opinion, is inspired of God. And we are a self-healing country. And now, this is the climax of the whole thing that I'm here for. And all of this is on your shoulders. If there was no BYU, I would be worried. In this room and on this campus are the caliber of the people that know how to use allies and alliances, who know how to use in unity their strength, and these principles that we've talked about, to go make this the type of country you want it to be for your kids. Because this is the most important thing. It's not about you, it's about your kids, isn't it? I don't think you're worried about you, I think you're worried about your kids, because that's what my worry was. And now I worry about my grandkids. And when I come here to BYU and I see you and I look into your eyes, I go back to Washington and I say, we got this. Doesn't mean it won't be rough. Doesn't mean we won't have some turbulence. I was in a plane coming in the other day, and we went through this series of turbulence, and I've never had anything quite like it. But guess what? The plane was built to withstand the turbulence. The pilot had been trained what to do in the turbulence, and we landed and we were just fine. And I think that describes our time just a little bit. Does it feel like we're going through some turbulence right now, and you're not sure the plane's going to hold together, and you're not sure the pilot was trained? But I'm telling you, we're going to land the plane. And you, in this room, President, if we could reconvene this room in 20 or 30 years, there's a U.S. Senator sitting right out there. There's a mayor of Provo, maybe even the President of the United States sitting in this room and on this campus. That I'm absolutely convinced. And now I get to answer all of your questions. So can we pivot to questions? And I'm just here to tell you that was a lot better than what was in the book.
Great. Put these here so I can keep track of time. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being willing to answer some questions. The questions I have are taken from questions that students submitted, and also some from our Political Affairs Society leadership. Just to start off, since we're talking about inspiring the next generation of public servants, what qualities or skills do you think are essential for young people to gain? Like, what should they be working on? What tools should they be building in themselves to be most impactful for government and politics?
You know, it's interesting. I get asked this a lot, and people come and see me a lot and ask, what should I do, right, so that I can be in the Senate? And this is the answer. Be a good person. We don't need more lawyers in Washington, D.C. We don't need more businessmen. We don't need more school teachers. We need more good people. And that's not to say that like all of those things, you know, are really good preparation for service in Washington. But would you rather have your senator be a good person or a good lawyer, right? And so for me, and I'll try not to take too long with you because I know you have a lot of questions, but if I can take just a minute with this. Michael Jordan, like that. Do we know who Michael Jordan is? Have you all forgotten? Is he way in the past? And it's not that old, right? So what did he say? Let the game come to you. Oh. What did I do? Okay, let the game come to you, right? What does that mean? Is that good? Okay, I'm probably just doing something wrong where I'm kicking it. Let the game come to you means don't overthink about where you want to end up. Go be a good person and do good things, and the game will come to you. And it might be the president of a university. It might be a U.S. senator. It might be a dad, right? It might be an ecclesiastical thing. And don't try to force the game, because if you are a good person and you wake up in the morning and you do your best to do well at what you do, I promise you the game will come to you.
Great, thank you. There's been recently a lot of layoffs of public servants, a lot of civil servants who were good people and worked very hard and are now unemployed. What advice do you have for students that are kind of losing hope that this is a viable career path when there's a lot of things, a lot of forces telling them that it's an unstable or perhaps even unappreciated or an expensive thing, that they're not worth the effort?
So let me put a few things in perspective. We have 2 million federal workers, and depends on how you count them. We actually have as high as 3 million people who are on the federal payroll. And we've laid off, this is hard because it's gone back and forth as to who's actually laid off, but we've laid off, let's say, 50,000 of those 3 million people. So first of all, putting it in perspective, serving in the federal government normally has been a very safe and predictable place to go. And what's been introduced is a little bit of risk, or uncertainty is probably a better word, into that. But I'm here to tell you there is no safe place. There's just not. And that's why you have to be the best that you are, because life will bring you layoffs. Life will bring you didn't get the raise you want, you didn't get the promotion you wanted. I guarantee you that is there for all of you. And so what you need to do is be above that. And you need to be the type of person where, if it doesn't matter if it's the federal government or if it's your company who has just told you that they have gone bankrupt, right? That because of who you are, because you woke up for 30 years to be the best person you could be, the game will come to you. And this is the deal. It doesn't always come as fast as you want. And you have to have patience, and you have to build allies and alliances. And guess what? You may need those allies and alliances when you can't make your mortgage, or where you don't know, how you're going to deal with the kids. This is why in unity there is strength, and allies and alliances and common ground are so important. It's not just politics, it's in your life where these things matter. Now, I would also say, let me just bring this up because it's not in the questions, but I think it's on on everybody's minds. There is a lot of what I would say disruption, right, in our country right now. When you are a little bit older and you have kids and you take those kids to Disneyland and there's 6 of them in the car, you and your wife are going to have, or your husband are going to have, what I call stop the car moments. What's a stop the car moment? It's like, I am done with you kids. I'm stopping the car. We're not going to Disneyland until you work this out. And in my family, you know what it always was? He touched me. Then the other sibling would say, no, he touched me. And then so you stop the car. And in many ways, the country stopped the car last November with the election. They wanted disruption because they were tired of government spending more money than it was bringing in. They wanted disruption because they knew what was happening down on the border was wrong for people, not just for us as a country, but wrong for people. They wanted disruption because people are dying in overseas wars that don't need to die. And that is a painful thing, and we're going through that as a country right now. It's a stop the car moment, and that means there's going to be some uncomfortableness and there's going to be some layoffs. Do you know that we're spending $2 trillion more than we're bringing in revenue every year as a country? Could you do that? How long could you do that in your homes? You can't, right? How long could you do that as a university? You can't. We can't do that as a country, and as a result, we are seeing some layoffs, and I'm not sure they're over, but you be the best person you can be, and that'll take care of itself.
So especially with BYU students, though, a lot of them are tooling up because they have foreign experience, they have foreign language experience, or they want to work in public health. And these are the areas that seem to be hardest hit. And I think it's difficult for them to see, their most viable career paths. They're told often that the government loves people like them who are sober-minded and body, right? Especially these jobs are important to them. And so what to do when it seems like the most viable career path seems to be the most targeted?
Okay, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but let me tell you about my experience here at BYU. So I went to Taiwan, I told to think on my mission. Before I went, I confessed to my mother, I had no idea what I want to do for a career. She said, don't worry about it, you go on your mission and it will take care of itself. So guess who was the first person after I came home from my mission to say, okay, now what are you going to do? It was my mom, right? And I didn't know. But you know what I did? I worked as hard as I could on good grades. I worked as hard as I could on being a good person. I worked as hard as I could on fulfilling my ecclesiastical responsibilities. And the game came to me, literally. And I'll tell you what happened. I had an uncle who invited me over to his house because he wanted me to sell a direct selling opportunity. Well, that wasn't for me, but while I was there was another man there who had heard about my mission to Taiwan, and he started asking me about the church. Well, I was a returned missionary. Guess what I'm going to do? So I actually set up an appointment with him. I went to his home and started teaching the discussions to him, which I had never done in English. It was really fun. Having done it in Chinese, you never really had quite, for me, the same ability to communicate feelings and emotions. So I started teaching him. I taught him a couple of discussions. And I walked out of his door one day and I said, you know, I think in the way this works in the United States is I'm supposed to get his neighbors involved. We didn't have that in Taiwan at the time. And so I picked a door at random, went and knocked on the door, and guess who answered the door? At the time, it was the president of the 70s Quorum. We know that as a ward mission leader today, and knocked on his door, and we started teaching him together. A few months later, he offered me a job, and that job is exactly what was the first cornerstone of me ending up here in this position today. And that's what I mean by the game came to me. So if you think service for the federal government is your thing, if you think service overseas is your thing, don't give up on that, but also watch and see if the game is coming to you. Keep pursuing that, keep going after that, but keep your eyes and ears open for what somebody with more power than you has in mind for you. And I believe it will come. That doesn't mean you won't have rough days. That doesn't mean you may not go work for the federal government and get laid off. It means you'll be okay if that's what happens.
Great. If you could change one aspect about how Congress, House or Senate operates today, this could be rules or structure or culture or process, what would it be and why would you choose that?
There's a number of problems. I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I think I've been trying to be optimistic with you today, but there are a number of problems. You know that. I couldn't get away with that with you, right? Telling you that there's no problems there. And I do believe if I could change one thing, it's that too much of what we do is aimed at two things, cable news and social media. And so my colleagues want to have 1 million followers, so they do things that get them 1 million followers. So I'm just curious, have anybody of you ever followed somebody because they passed a bill? Right? No. But have you followed somebody because they said something totally outrageous that you thought was interesting and you wanted to know more? Yes. Right? And so that's what I would change, is that we are rewarding bad behavior in Washington, D.C. And when good behavior happens, it goes totally ignored and unrecognized. And I am here to tell you that most of my colleagues thrive on doing good things, and nobody cares or nobody notices, and they quickly get tired and go on. And the ones who scream and shout and yell are recognized and have the 1 million followers and end up on the cable news, and they're not moving our country forward.
Okay, well, speaking of bad behavior,
I didn't do it.
I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it. Some people have been discouraged that Congress does not seem to be acting as a check or balance against other branches of government, especially the executive branch. What do you see as the role of Congress in modern politics, and has it changed and should it change?
Okay, I'm going to say it, and then my staff's going to say, we told you not to say it.
Great.
Sometimes I feel like shouting from the housetops, the Senate does not elect the president. You do. And yet, you want me to fix it. And the reality of it is, I think we need to take a harder look at our families, our communities, and why we're electing the type of people that we're electing, instead of looking to Washington, D.C. to fix it. The founders gave us some ability to constrain the other branches of government, but not completely. So my tools in the Senate are basically two things: the bully pulpit and passing legislation.
Sorry, and confirming nominees.
Fine, we confirm nominees, right?
Right, which is the check on the executive branch, which is why I bring
Not much of a check.
Yeah.
It's not, right?
Yeah, I will agree with you there.
Yeah, it's not much of a check, right? And we can hold hearings, right? And we have some degree of accountability. But we didn't elect him. You guys did. And by you guys, I mean collectively as a country, not individually. And I do think, I guess the point I'm trying to make is too often we're looking to Washington and saying, rein the president in. And yet we're not looking at communities, we're not looking at families, we're not looking at society that for a long time, I'm not talking about our current president necessarily, and for a long time has elected a president that people don't feel like represents them, and yet they get there because the people they represent put them there.
So in terms of Congress's role in checking the executive, you don't feel like that role is there, that it's to the populace to check?
No, I don't. That's why my staff doesn't want me to go there, because
Sure.
it sounds like I'm deferring and saying, oh, not my problem, right? So now let's talk about my problem, which is where you want to go.
Because we all have this responsibility.
Yeah.
But we have a 1 in 300 million vote, and you have a 1 in 100 vote.
On what? On nominations, yes.
Yes.
But what else?
On nominations, on
As far as
all the legislation. Oh, and
as far as keeping the president in check.
Sure. There are other powers that perhaps I shouldn't enumerate because they'll seem salacious, but things like, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the word for this, impeachment, things like that,
Yeah.
right? They're enumerated in the Constitution, but
Absolutely.
we just don't feel like, some people don't feel like it's happening.
So I'd push back
Sure.
on that and tell you.
I'm not saying that everyone's expecting you to go impeach the president as soon as you walk in this room, but there are enumerated checks.
Yeah, there are. And what I think is really interesting is between the three branches of government, it's actually the courts that are most active in reining in the current president right now. And I think that's exactly what the founders had intended. And I think some people, some people back in D.C., particularly my Democratic colleagues, are saying, hey, we're in a constitutional crisis because the president's doing this and this and this and this. And I say this is an exact opposite of the constitutional crisis because those are all being checked. Not all, but the ones that should be checked are being checked by the courts. And it's a balance. And the balance that the founders put into place actually lets the courts move very quickly, and quite frankly, Congress moves very slowly. To pass a piece of legislation that if it were to rein in the president, takes months and months and months to do, and that's if it moves quickly. And then you have to have consensus of at least 60 senators. And so, show me a time when 10 senators, hypothetically, are going to go against their own president, or 50 are going to go against their own president. And so the reality of it is that Congress is a very bad tool for reining in the executive branch.
Great. Thank you. I think we'll make this our last question.
Okay.
In times, it feels like we're in a time of kind of some amount of distrust and bad faith among the populace and perhaps between the elected officials and the population, their constituents. How can we restore trust in government and encourage more young people to civic leadership? Huge question. And I wish I had a perfect answer. I'll give you the best answer. I was really hoping that we could just solve this right here.
When trust is broken, and I will be the first to tell you, trust is broken in so many places with government. When trust is broken, how do you get it back, right? You can't say, trust me, I'm going to fix this. And I think here again, I'll come back to kind of the stop the car moment. I think for too long in Washington, we've said, just trust us. We'll take care of you, just trust us. And I think the American people are at that place where they don't trust. And the only way I know to earn trust back is one little thing at a time. And then show a pattern that you are trustworthy. To do that, we have to elect people that have that capacity to do that. We don't always do that. And so here's my next pitch for all of you. think about running for city council. Think about running for school board. Think about running for mayor. And before long, you know, if everybody in this room thought about running for school board, we're going to get some mayors out of this room. If everybody thought about running for mayor, we're going to get some members of Congress out of this room, and vice versa. And I just think we do need to restore trust. And I'll go back to the era when I was at BYU. It felt the same way, like there was not a lot of trust. And we've ebbed and flowed as a country, I think, in that. And I have full confidence we'll ebb back because of great people like we have here.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you would all please join me in thanking the senator for his time.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you everyone so much for attending today. Just another round of applause for Dr. Liz McGuire and Senator Curtis. Thank you so much. Now we do have BYU specialty brownies out in the hall. Also, if you came for an FHSS XP event, you can scan the QR codes on the outside. There are little flyers up there. But thank you so much for coming today.